Table 7 needs more water, and for God's sake, someone check on the Hendersons before they complain again. The headwaiter's voice cut through the controlled chaos of Leonard's Restaurant, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, where a single entree cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill, and reservations were booked 3 months in advance. Victoria Sinclair stood near the mahogany bar in the corner, her elegant red dress catching the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers overhead, watching her boss, Alexander Grant, charm a table of Japanese investors with the ease of a man who had closed billion-dollar deals before breakfast. But her eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen door, toward him, the dishwasher. She didn't know his name. In 12 weeks of Thursday evening dinners at this restaurant, she had never once heard anyone call him anything at all. He was simply there, moving through the chaos of the service staff, like water flowing around stones, present but somehow untouchable, visible but strangely invisible to everyone around him. Victoria adjusted the thin gold bracelet on her wrist and tried to focus on Alexander's conversation with the investors, something about a merger that would reshape the telecommunications industry, but her attention betrayed her again, pulling her gaze back to that swinging kitchen door. There he was. He emerged carrying a tray of freshly polished wine glasses, each one gleaming like captured starlight. He was tall, easily 6'2", with shoulders too broad for the plain service uniform that tried to contain them. His hair was dark-cut short and practical, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested he had learned long ago to keep his thoughts hidden behind carefully neutral features. But it was his hands that she noticed, most large and capable, handling the delicate crystal stemware with surgical precision, as though each glass was something precious that deserved his complete attention. There was something military in his posture, something dangerous in his stillness, something that made Victoria's heart beat faster every Thursday at 7 o'clock, though she would never admit it to anyone, least of all herself. 12 weeks she had been coming here. 90 days of sitting in the same restaurant, ordering the same Americano. She never finished watching Alexander work his magic on clients, while she took mental notes and anticipated his every need. And for all those weeks, that man in the service uniform had never once looked at her. Not directly, not openly, but she felt it. The weight of his attention pressing against her skin like summer heat through a window. The way his body seemed to know exactly where she stood in the room, even when his eyes were fixed on crystal glasses and silver polish. He was aware of her in a way that went beyond simple observation, and that awareness made something flutter in her chest that she had thought long dead. What happened in the next 47 minutes would reveal secrets buried for years, and prove that sometimes the people who seem most invisible are the ones who see everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Victoria forced her attention back to Alexander's table, where the Japanese executives were laughing at something her boss had said. She should be paying attention to this. She should be mentally cataloging the names, the preferences, the subtle body language that would help her prepare the follow-up materials tomorrow morning. That was her job. That was what she was good at. But her eyes betrayed her one more time, drifting toward the kitchen door, just as he disappeared through it, and she found herself wondering for the 100th time who he really was. 2 weeks ago, Victoria had learned something important about the mysterious dishwasher, though she hadn't realized it at the time. She had been leaving the restaurant after a particularly long dinner meeting, her feet aching in the designer heels she wore because Alexander expected a certain level of professional polish from his executive assistant. The grand staircase that swept down from the private dining rooms to the main floor was carpeted in deep burgundy, and she had descended it hundreds of times without incident. But that night, her heel had caught on a loose thread in the carpet. One moment she was walking, and the next moment she was falling, her body pitching forward into empty air, her arms windmilling uselessly as gravity took hold. She had time to think very clearly that this was going to hurt. And then she wasn't falling anymore. A hand had caught her elbow, strong and warm and absolutely certain. The grip was firm, but not painful. The pressure exactly calibrated to stop her momentum without jerking her shoulder. She was steadied with the ease of someone who had caught falling things his entire life, pulled gently back to solid ground, as though the whole incident had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Victoria had turned to thank her rescuer, the words already forming on her lips, but he was gone. Just like that, as if he had never been there at all. She had stood on that staircase for a full minute, her heart pounding against her ribs, staring at the empty space where warmth and strength had been just seconds before. When she finally looked toward the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of a broad back, disappearing through the swinging door. The dishwasher. He had been there. He had saved her. And then he had vanished before she could even say thank you, as though accepting gratitude was somehow more dangerous than letting a stranger fall down a flight of stairs. That night, lying in her empty apartment in the darkness, Victoria had replayed the moment over and over in her mind. The speed of his reaction, the precision of his grip, the way his body had positioned itself to absorb her momentum without either of them losing balance. That wasn't the reflexes of a dishwasher. That was the reflexes of someone trained to respond to threats, someone whose body had learned to act before his mind had time to think. Who was he? The question had kept her awake more nights than she wanted to admit. 6 hours before Victoria would get the answer to her question, in a small apartment in Queens that cost less per month than one of Alexander Grant's restaurant tabs. Connor Hayes stood at his kitchen stove, flipping pancakes while his daughter did homework at the table behind him. The apartment was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, walls thin enough that they could hear Mrs. Kowalski watching her Polish soap operas next door. The furniture had come from thrift stores and curb alerts assembled with careful patience into something that looked intentional rather than desperate. The carpet was worn in the high-traffic areas, showing paths between the kitchen and the living room, and the small hallway that led to the bedrooms. The windows needed new weather stripping, something Connor kept meaning to install on one of his rare days off. But it was clean, it was safe, and it was very, very far from the world that had made him what he was. Every morning followed the same pattern, and Connor found comfort in the repetition. Up at 6, while Lily still slept, to start the coffee and have a few quiet minutes with his thoughts. Then, pancakes, because they were the one thing he could cook that made his daughter smile the way her mother used to smile, and that smile was worth more to him than all the money in all the bank accounts of all the wealthy people he served at Leonard's restaurant. The griddle sizzled as he poured another circle of batter, watching the tiny bubbles form around the edges that told him when it was time to flip. He had learned to make pancakes from watching YouTube videos in the dark, months after Claire died, when Lily would barely eat anything, and he had been desperate to find something, anything that would bring light back into her eyes. Chocolate chip pancakes had been the answer. Claire's recipe, passed down from her mother, recreated through trial and error until he got it right. The first time Lily had smiled while eating one, really smiled, Connor had gone into the bathroom afterward and cried for 20 minutes. The world that had taken Claire from him felt very far away in moments like this. The weight of missions, he tried not to think about the nightmares that still came. Some nights, the hands that had done terrible things, now carefully arranging chocolate chips into a smiley face on top of his daughter's breakfast. That was the point. That was exactly the point. "Daddy," Lily's voice pulled him back to the present. He turned from the stove to look at her, this tiny human who had somehow become the center of his entire universe. 8 years old, with hair the color of summer wheat that fell in messy waves around her face, and a chin set with the same stubborn determination he saw in the mirror every morning. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's smile, her mother's habit of tapping her fingers on the table when she wanted to make a point. "Yeah, little bird, you always say you're just a dishwasher." She tapped her finger on the table once, twice her expression serious, in a way that made her look like a tiny lawyer preparing to present a case. "But you're not just a dishwasher." Connor raised an eyebrow spatula, still in hand. "I'm not." "No." She shook her head firmly. "You're my daddy, and my daddy is the best person in the whole world. So you don't get to say just anymore." Another tap of her finger driving the point home. "Deal." Connor looked at this small, fierce creature who had somehow inherited all of Claire's light and wrapped it in a personality that took no prisoners. His throat felt tight the way it always did when Lily reminded him that despite everything he had done and everything he had failed to do, he was still capable of creating something good. "Deal," he said softly. Lily grinned, the seriousness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, and attacked her pancakes with the enthusiasm of someone who had just won a major negotiation. Connor watched her eat, memorizing the moment the way he memorized everything now. The way the morning sunlight caught her hair and turned it golden. The way she hummed while she chewed some song from a movie they had watched together last weekend. The small chocolate smear at the corner of her mouth that she wouldn't notice until he pointed it out. And then she would wipe it away with a dramatic sigh, as though he had asked her to climb a mountain instead of use a napkin. These were the things worth living for. These small, ordinary, precious things that the people he served at Leonard's restaurant probably never even noticed in their own lives because they were too busy chasing the next deal. The next merger, the next $1 billion. Connor had chased those kinds of things once. Power and purpose and the adrenaline rush of being someone who could change the course of events. He had been good at it too. Better than good. He had been one of the best. And then Claire had gotten sick, and none of it had mattered anymore. 3 years ago, Connor had sat in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and approaching death, holding his wife's hand, while machines beeped their steady countdown to goodbye. Claire had been so thin by the end. The cancer had carved away everything except her spirit, and even that was flickering like a candle in a wind that wouldn't stop blowing. Her hair was gone, her cheeks were hollow, and her skin had taken on the gray pallor that Connor had learned to recognize from his years of watching people die. But her eyes were still hers, still fierce and loving and absolutely determined to say what needed to be said before she ran out of time to say it. "You have to live, Connor." Her voice was a whisper, barely audible above the mechanical breathing of the machines, but her grip on his hand was iron. "Not just for me, for Lily. You have to actually live." "I will," he had promised, even though the words felt like lies in his mouth. How was he supposed to live when the person who made life worth living was slipping away from him one shallow breath at a time? "I'm not afraid of dying." Claire's thumb traced circles on his palm, the same gesture she had used to soothe him for the 15 years they had been together. "I'm only afraid she'll forget. The way I smelled when I held her, the sound of my voice when I sang her to sleep. You have to keep those things alive for her, Connor. Promise me." "I promise. And don't let what you were destroy what you can become." Her eyes held his, fierce even now, even at the end. "She needs a father, not a ghost. Promise me you won't disappear into the shadows again." He had promised that too, his voice breaking on the words. 3 years later, washing dishes in a restaurant where millionaires ate meals that cost more than his monthly rent, Connor was still trying to figure out how to keep those promises. He showed up every day. He made pancakes. He helped with homework and read bedtime stories and tried to be present in all the ways that mattered. But some nights after Lily was asleep, he sat in the darkness and felt like a ghost pretending to be a man, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive, keeping his promises to Claire through sheer force of will, while something hollow echoed in his chest where his heart used to be. The pancakes were finished. Connor arranged them on Lily's favorite plate, the one with the cartoon birds around the rim, and carried them to the table. "Here you go, little bird," chocolate chip smiley faces requested. Lily beamed up at him, and for a moment, just a moment, The hollow feeling receded. For her, he thought. For her, I can keep pretending until the pretending becomes real. That same morning, 43 floors above the streets of Manhattan, Alexander Grant stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office and stared down at the city like a general surveying a conquered kingdom. He was 58 years old, with silver hair that had once been dark, and a face that magazines described as distinguished, but that Alexander knew was simply old. 2 marriages had ended in expensive divorces. One brother had died 3 years ago under circumstances that still kept Alexander awake some nights. And $12 billion sat in various accounts and investments around the world, none of which could buy back a single moment with any of the people he had lost. The business world called him brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. They wrote articles about his strategic genius and his ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. They speculated about his next acquisition, his next move on the corporate chessboard, his next billion. They didn't see the hollow space behind his ribs where something human used to live. The door to his office opened. Alexander didn't turn around, but he knew who it was. Victoria Sinclair always arrived with his coffee precisely 4 minutes before he knew he needed it, a skill that bordered on supernatural and was one of the many reasons he had come to depend on her more than he would ever admit. "Sir." Her voice was calm and professional, the same tone she used for everything. "Your coffee. And I wanted to remind you that today is—" She paused, and Alexander heard something shift in her carefully controlled voice. "Today is the anniversary. 3 years." Alexander went still. 847 employees worked in this building. Executives, analysts, assistants, maintenance staff, security guards. He knew the exact number because he reviewed the headcount reports every quarter, tracking the growth of the empire he had built from nothing. 847 people, and not one of them remembered that today was the anniversary of his brother's death. Not one of them had looked at the calendar and thought about what this date meant to Alexander Grant. Not one of them, except Victoria. "Would you like me to reschedule the dinner with the Tanaka group?" she asked quietly. "I can make your apologies cite a medical issue. They would understand." Alexander finally turned from the window. Victoria stood in the doorway, his coffee held in one hand, her tablet in the other, her expression carefully neutral, in a way that he had come to recognize meant she was feeling something she didn't want him to see. She was wearing red today, an elegant dress that fit her perfectly and complemented her blonde hair, which was pulled back in the professional style she favored for work. She was beautiful, objectively speaking, but Alexander had never thought of her that way. She was too valuable to him as an assistant to complicate things with something as messy as attraction. "No," he said finally. "Work helps me not think about it." "You understand." Something flickered in Victoria's blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement of someone who had also learned to bury grief beneath productivity, to use work as a wall against the memories that waited in quiet moments. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I understand." She set his coffee on his desk, checked something on her tablet, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Sir, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. About your brother. I know today must be difficult." Alexander looked at her. This woman who had been his right hand for 4 years, who knew his schedule better than he did, and anticipated his needs before he knew he had them. In all that time, they had never talked about anything personal. He didn't even know if she had family or friends, or a life outside of the endless work she did for him. "Thank you, Victoria," he said, and meant it. She nodded once and was gone. Alexander turned back to the window, looking down at the city that had given him everything, except the things that actually mattered. Somewhere down there, far below the glass and steel towers of corporate power, a dishwasher was making pancakes for his daughter, and that man was probably happier than Alexander Grant had been in years. At 7:47 p.m., 3 men walked into Leonard's restaurant, and Connor Hayes saw them before anyone else. He was in the kitchen polishing glasses at his usual station near the service door when something made him look up. Not a sound exactly. More like a shift in the energy of the room, a disturbance in the careful choreography of the restaurant that his trained instincts recognized even before his conscious mind could process what he was seeing. 3 men. Dark suits, well-tailored, but slightly wrong in a way that most people wouldn't notice. Coordinated movement through the door, military spacing between them that spoke of training rather than coincidence. Right hands curved at their sides in a way that concealed rather than revealed fingers, positioned for quick access to something hidden beneath their jackets. Their eyes swept the room in tactical formation. One watched the exits. One scanned the service staff. One locked onto the corner table where Alexander Grant sat with his Japanese investors Victoria standing attentively nearby. Connor set down the glass he was polishing. His heart rate didn't change. 62 beats per minute, the same as always. His body had forgotten how to feel fear a long time ago. It only knew preparation now. Assessment. Response. The first man moved toward Alexander's table with purpose in his stride, not the hesitant approach of someone asking for an autograph or wanting to pitch a business idea. The direct, aggressive advance of someone who had already decided what was going to happen and was simply closing the distance required to make it happen. Connor was moving before he made the conscious decision to act. The first attacker grabbed Alexander by the lapels of his expensive suit, yanking the older man up from his chair with a violence that sent wine glasses crashing to the floor. Victoria stepped forward instinctively, trying to intervene, and the second attacker shoved her backward with casual brutality. She fell. Her head struck the edge of a nearby table with a sound that Connor heard even from across the room. Blood bloomed at her temple. Something cold and precise clicked into place in Connor's mind. The part of him that he had tried so hard to bury, the part that Claire had made him promise to leave behind, woke up and took control. He moved. No thought. No hesitation. Just muscle memory forged in sand and blood and darkness rising up through years of pancakes and bedtime stories to do what it had been trained to do. The first attacker never saw him coming. Connor's palm strike caught him in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs, and before the man could even begin to double over an elbow. To the temple sent him crumpling to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. The second attacker turned at the sound, right hand diving toward his jacket, but Connor was already inside his reach. A precise strike to the pressure point at the base of his neck, another to the nerve cluster in his inner arm, and the man went down without even managing to draw his weapon. The third attacker was faster. He saw Connor coming and managed to throw a wild punch, a haymaker that would have knocked out most men if it had connected. But Connor wasn't most men. He slipped inside the arc of the swing, used the man's own momentum against him, and sent him crashing face first into the marble floor with a sound that made the watching diners gasp. Total elapsed time, 4 seconds. 3 bodies on the floor. Not dead, just sleeping. Connor stood among them, breathing normally, his shirt still tucked neatly into his service uniform. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Somewhere, a woman was crying softly. A wine glass rolled off a table and shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. Connor's eyes found Victoria's. She was sitting on the floor where she had fallen, one hand pressed to the blood at her temple, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear, though she had every right to be afraid of a man who had just done what he had done. Not gratitude, though he had probably saved her employer's life, and possibly her own. Recognition, as if she had finally found the answer to a question she had been asking for 3 months. Connor held her gaze for a moment that stretched like eternity, and then the sound of sirens in the distance reminded him that there were consequences in the real world, and he turned and walked back toward the kitchen before anyone could think to stop him. The police had questions. Of course they had questions. 3 unconscious men on the floor of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a billionaire CEO claiming he had been attacked, and approximately 40 witnesses who all had slightly different versions of what had happened. Connor answered the questions carefully, keeping his responses short and vague, in the way he had learned long ago when dealing with authorities. He was a dishwasher. He had seen men attacking a customer. He had intervened. No, he didn't know any special techniques. Just instinct. Adrenaline. Lucky timing. The detective taking his statement clearly didn't believe a word of it. But there was no crime in being good at defending yourself, and the three attackers weren't talking. So eventually, Connor was released with a request to remain available for follow-up questions. He was heading for the kitchen exit, already planning the fastest route home to check on Lily, when Victoria Sinclair stepped into his path. Her temple had been cleaned and bandaged, a white square of gauze standing out against her blonde hair. Her red dress was stained with something that might have been wine, or might have been blood, and her carefully composed professional mask had cracked around the edges, showing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "You know my name," she said. It wasn't a question. Connor stopped walking. He should push past her, make some excuse, disappear into the night before this conversation went somewhere he couldn't afford to follow. But something in her eyes held him in place, a desperate need to understand that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "Victoria Sinclair," he said quietly. 34 years old, executive assistant to Alexander Grant for 4 years. You drink Americanos, no sugar, with an extra shot on Mondays because you hate the start of the week and need more caffeine to get through them. Her breath caught audibly. You rub your left wrist when you're stressed. Connor continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You do it unconsciously, like you're checking for something that used to be there. A bracelet maybe. Or a watch. Something someone gave you that you don't wear anymore. Victoria's hand moved unconsciously to her wrist, confirming his observation, and something in her expression cracked further. You come here every Thursday evening, he said. Not for work, not really. This is the last restaurant you visited with someone who left you, isn't it? You come here to remember, or maybe to punish yourself. I'm not sure which. You order the same coffee you never finish, and you watch the door like you're waiting for someone to walk through it, even though you know they never will. Tears were forming in Victoria's eyes, now threatening to spill over onto her cheeks. She stared at him like he had just read pages from a diary she thought she had hidden from the world. You've been watching me for 12 weeks. Yes. Why? Something shifted in Connor's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. The carefully neutral mask he wore slipped for just a moment, revealing the ghost of a man who had once known how to feel things and had forgotten along the way. I'm sorry, he said. That was old habits. I didn't mean to intrude. I notice things. It's what I was trained to do. I don't know how to turn it off. That's not what I asked. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that Connor could smell her perfume, something light and floral that seemed at odds with the corporate warrior he had watched for 3 months. I asked why. Why me? Why watch me instead of anyone else in this restaurant? Connor didn't answer. He couldn't answer because the truth was something he had been running from since the first time he saw her standing in the corner in her red dress, looking like she was waiting for someone who would never come. The truth was that she reminded him of himself. Alone in a crowded room, haunted by someone who had left, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. The truth was that watching her had become the closest thing to human connection he had allowed himself in 3 years. I should go, he said finally. My daughter is waiting for me. He stepped around Victoria and pushed through the kitchen door before she could stop him, but he felt her eyes on his back all the way out. Connor's apartment was dark and quiet when he got home. Mrs. Kowalski from next door had watched Lily for the evening as she did every Thursday, and she had left a note on the kitchen counter saying that Lily was asleep and had been no trouble at all. He checked on his daughter first, easing her bedroom door open just far enough to see her small form curled under the blankets, her stuffed owl clutched against her chest. She was breathing slowly and evenly, lost in dreams that he hoped were kind. For a long moment, Connor just stood there, watching her sleep. 3 years ago, when Claire was dying, he had made promises about the kind of father he would be, the kind of man he would become, the kind of life he would build for this child who hadn't asked to be born into a world where people like him existed. Tonight, he had broken one of those promises. He had used his skills again. Not to hurt anyone, not really, but the 3 men in that restaurant would wake up with headaches that lasted for days and a newfound respect for dishwashers. He had let the part of himself that Claire had asked him to bury come back to the surface, and it had felt good. That was the worst part. It had felt good. Connor closed Lily's door gently and walked to his own bedroom. He didn't turn on the lights. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness and opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand, pulling out a photograph that he usually kept face down, where he couldn't see it. Claire smiled up at him from the picture forever frozen in white lace and hope. Their wedding day. The happiest day of his life, back when he had still believed that happiness was something he deserved. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the photograph. "I promised I wouldn't let anyone else in. I promised I would just be Lily's father, nothing else." But he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't explain to his dead wife that a woman in a red dress had somehow gotten under his skin without even trying. Couldn't admit that watching Victoria Sinclair for 12 weeks had awakened something in him that he thought had died along with Claire. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. Connor picked it up already, knowing somehow that whoever was on the other end was not going to bring good news. The text message glowed in the darkness. "Hello again, Sergeant Hayes. 6 years since Kandahar. 43 civilians you saved. $3 million you cost me. Time to settle up. VC. Victor Crane." The blood in Connor's veins turned to ice. The video hit 15 million views in 18 hours. Someone in the restaurant had recorded the entire incident on their phone, capturing the attack, and Connor's response in surprisingly clear footage. Within hours, it was everywhere: news sites, social media entertainment shows doing segments on the mysterious dishwasher who had single-handedly stopped 3 armed attackers in under 5 seconds. Connor found out about it when Lily came home from school the next day. She was waiting at the door when he got home from his morning errands, her tablet clutched in her hands and her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and concern that made his stomach drop. "Daddy," she said, holding up the tablet to show him the video playing on the screen. "This is you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who knew her father better than he knew himself. Connor knelt down to her level, his heart pounding despite his best efforts to stay calm. "Yes, little bird. That's me. You're a superhero." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, as though she was announcing that the sky was blue or that chocolate chip pancakes were the best breakfast food. "You just pretend to be normal. I'm not a superhero, sweetheart." Connor reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just someone who learned how to help people a long time ago." "That's the definition, Daddy." Lily gave him the look she reserved for moments when adults were being particularly slow. Superheroes help people when nobody makes them. Case closed. Despite everything, Connor almost smiled. His daughter had a way of cutting through complexity that he had never quite mastered. "Okay, little bird, but this superhero needs you to promise something." Lily's expression shifted, becoming more serious. She sensed that something was wrong, the way children always sense these things, even when adults try to hide them. "What kind of promise?" "If anyone strange comes near you anywhere, if anyone you don't know tries to talk to you, or follow you, or take pictures of you, I need you to tell me immediately. Not later. Right away." Lily studied his face with eyes that were too old for 8 years. She had seen enough in her short life to know that adults didn't ask for promises like this without reason. "There's a bad guy, isn't there?" she said quietly. "Someone looking for you." Connor's heart clenched. He had promised Claire that he would never lie to their daughter, even when the truth was hard, even when he wanted to protect her from the ugliness of the world he had once inhabited. Maybe he admitted. "I'm not sure yet." Lily nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. Then she reached up and patted his cheek with her small hand, a gesture so like Claire that it took his breath away. "Then you have to be careful, too." "Daddy," she said, "even superheroes need someone watching their back." 3 days after the restaurant incident, Victoria Sinclair appeared at the playground behind Connor's apartment building. He was pushing Lily on the swings when he saw her crossing the patchy grass, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight, and her expression set with the determination of someone who had spent considerable effort tracking down an address that wasn't listed anywhere public. "You found me," he said, not pausing in his pushing. "I have resources." Victoria stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her, in a way that suggested she wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. "Mr. Grant was grateful for what you did. He wanted to offer you a reward, but I convinced him that you probably wouldn't accept it. You were right." Lily chose that moment to jump off the swing at the peak of its arc landing, with the perfect confidence of a child who had never learned to be afraid of falling. She turned to look at the stranger, her eyes going wide. "Daddy, who's that?" She walked closer, studying Victoria with the unabashed curiosity of the young. "She's so pretty." Something complicated crossed Victoria's face at the compliment, a mixture of pleasure and pain that Connor filed away for later analysis. "Lily, this is Miss Victoria," he said. "Victoria, this is my daughter Lily, but she only answers to Lily if she's in trouble. Lily, like the bird." The little girl's face lit up. "There's a bird called a wren. They're tiny, but they're really fast, and they sing really loud. Do you know about birds?" "I know a little," Victoria said, her professional composure slipping slightly in the face of Lily's enthusiasm. "But I'd love to learn more." "You should call me Tori." She added the words coming out before she seemed to realize she was saying them. "Victoria is so formal. Tori is what my friends call me." "Miss Tori," Lily repeated, tasting the name. "I like that. It sounds like a bird, too." Victoria turned to Connor, and the vulnerable look was back in her eyes. "I came to thank you. Properly. You saved my life." Before Connor could respond, Lily inserted herself into the conversation with the confidence of someone who had never learned that adults didn't always appreciate input from 8-year-olds. "Daddy saves everybody," she announced as though stating an obvious fact. "That's just what he does. Do you want to be his friend?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the directness. What? Daddy doesn't have friends." Lily's tone was matter-of-fact, but tinged with concern. "He just has me, and Mrs. Kowalski, and the people at the restaurant who don't even know his name. He should have friends. Everyone should have friends." Lily, Connor said warningly, but his daughter was undeterred. "We should get ice cream," she declared. "Ice cream makes everyone friends. That's science." Victoria looked at Connor, her eyes asking a question he wasn't sure how to answer. He should send her away, should maintain the careful distance he had built between himself and the rest of the world, should protect her from the darkness that had followed him here from a life he had tried so hard to leave behind. But Lily was already reaching for Victoria's hand, her small fingers wrapping around the older woman's with complete trust, and Connor found that he didn't have the strength to say no. "There's a place on the corner," he heard himself saying. "They have good chocolate." The ice cream shop was small and bright, with cheerful murals of cartoon cows on the walls, and a teenager behind the counter who looked like she was counting the minutes until her shift ended. Lily ordered rainbow sprinkles with extra everything, chattering the entire time about birds, and her theory that pigeons were actually just seagulls who had decided to move to the city. Victoria listened with an attention that seemed genuine, asking questions and making comments that showed she was actually tracking Lily's sometimes winding logic. She ordered vanilla, the simplest option on the menu, and Connor noticed that she ate it slowly, savoring each bite, as though she wasn't used to allowing herself simple pleasures. They sat on a bench outside the shop, Lily between them, her ice cream cone already dripping rainbow streams down her wrist. The afternoon sun was warm, and for a few minutes the three of them existed in a bubble of something that felt almost like peace. "You should know something," Lily said, suddenly looking up at Victoria with serious eyes. "Miss Tori is sad. Daddy is sad too. Sad people should be together so they can be less sad. That's also science." Victoria's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Connor felt his ears getting warm. "Lily." He started, but his daughter was already moving on, so Miss Tori has to come back. She concluded with the finality of someone who had just solved a complicated equation. "She has to come back and be our friend, because we're sad, and she's sad, and together we'll be less sad." Deal. The logic was absurd and perfect and heartbreaking all at the same time. Victoria looked at Connor over Lily's head, her eyes bright with what might have been tears. "What do you think? Do you want me to come back?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that went far beyond a simple visit. Connor thought about the photograph he kept face down in his drawer, about the promises he had made to a dying woman, about the ghost of Victor Crane that was somewhere out there in the city, waiting to settle a 6-year-old score. He should say no. He should protect this woman from the complications of his life, the danger of his past, the broken places inside him that he wasn't sure could ever be fixed. But Lily was looking at him with hope in her eyes, and Victoria was looking at him with something that might have been the same, and Connor found that he was tired of being alone. "I think he said slowly that I would like that." Victoria Sinclair had built her walls brick by brick over the course of 2 years, constructing them so carefully that sometimes she forgot they were there at all. Daniel had been everything she thought she wanted when they first met. Ambitious, charming, successful with the kind of easy confidence that came from a lifetime of never having to doubt his place in the world. They had met at a corporate event, talked until the venue closed, exchanged numbers, and fallen into a relationship with the speed and inevitability of two people who had been waiting for each other without knowing it. 6 months later, he had proposed with a ring that cost more than Victoria's yearly salary and a speech about building a life together that had made her cry happy tears. They had planned their wedding with the meticulous attention to detail that Victoria brought to everything. China patterns and seating charts and arguments about whether to have a band or a DJ. They had talked about children's names, about buying a house in Connecticut, about growing old together on a porch somewhere, watching grandchildren play. Victoria had allowed herself to believe in that future, had allowed herself to trust for the first time since aging out of the foster care system at 18 that she had finally found a place where she belonged. Then she had discovered the truth. The late nights weren't work. The business trips weren't business. The phone calls he took in other rooms weren't from clients. Daniel had been living a double life for the better part of their engagement, carrying on an affair with a woman he had met at the gym, and Victoria had been too blinded by her own desperate need for stability to see what was right in front of her face. When she confronted him with the evidence text messages and credit card receipts and a photograph that left no room for denial, he hadn't even had the decency to lie. "You're too intense." Sarah, he had said, using the nickname she had once loved and now couldn't stand. "Too serious. I need someone who knows how to have fun." He had said it so casually, like he was returning a shirt that didn't fit quite right. Like their relationship, their engagement, their entire planned future together was just an inconvenient mistake that he was correcting. Victoria had thrown herself into work after that, had become indispensable to Alexander Grant, arriving early and staying late, and anticipating his every need before he knew he had it. She had built a reputation as someone who never cracked, never showed weakness, never let anyone close enough to see the fractures beneath her professional armor, but she was an orphan before any of that. She had grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home, never quite belonging anywhere, never staying long enough to put down roots before being moved again, for reasons that no one ever bothered to explain to her. Daniel was the first person who had made her feel like she had a family. He was the reason she had ignored the red flags, convinced herself that if she just loved him enough, he would remember why he had once loved her. She had been so desperate for belonging that she had built her entire sense of self around a man who was never worthy of it. She had been wrong, and the wrongness had cracked something inside her that she wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Now she returned to Leonard's restaurant every Thursday, the last place she and Daniel had visited together before she discovered the truth. She sat in the corner and ordered coffee she never finished, and watched the door like she was waiting for someone to walk through it, even though she knew they never would. It was a punishment, a penance, a way of reminding herself that hope was dangerous and trust was foolish, and she should never ever let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. Until the night a dishwasher caught her on the stairs, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Seen, not as an assistant or a broken engagement or a body in a red dress. Just seen, as herself, as the person she had been before Daniel taught her that person wasn't good enough. And now she was standing in a playground in Queens, eating ice cream with a little girl who had declared them all friends, feeling the walls she had built so carefully starting to crack. In the days that followed the playground visit, something shifted in Victoria's carefully ordered life. She started coming by Connor's apartment after work, not every day, but often enough that it began to feel like a habit. She would help Lily with homework, while Connor cooked dinner in the tiny kitchen, the three of them occupying the small space with an ease that should have felt strange, but somehow didn't. Tuesday became bird documentary night because Lily insisted that Miss Torrey needed proper education about migration patterns and the difference between corvids and passerines. Victoria found herself taking actual notes while Lily provided running commentary, correcting the narrator's pronunciation of Archaeopteryx and explaining why certain species were criminally underrated by mainstream bird enthusiasts. Marketing Lily would declare with the authority of someone who had given the matter considerable thought. Some birds just have better agents. Thursday became cooking experiment night, where Connor attempted increasingly ambitious recipes with mixed results. The lasagna incident involved smoke alarms, a brief evacuation onto the fire escape, and eventual surrender to takeout pizza. The attempt at homemade bread turned out surprisingly edible. The soufflé experiment became a family legend that they would laugh about for years, though in the moment it had seemed more like a culinary disaster of epic proportions. Daddy Lily had announced after the soufflé collapsed for the 3rd time, "You're much better at protecting people than you are at feeding them." Connor had looked so offended that Victoria had laughed until her stomach hurt, and something warm and bright had bloomed in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Saturday mornings, Victoria started arriving with fresh bagels from a place she had discovered near her apartment. She would find Connor at the stove making pancakes, Lily setting the table with mismatched plates that had clearly been collected from different thrift stores over the years. Morning sunlight streaming through windows that needed new weather stripping. It was chaotic and imperfect, and nothing like the polished life she had imagined building with Daniel. It was better. "You're becoming a regular fixture," Connor said one Saturday morning, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Is that a problem?" He turned from the stove to look at her, and Victoria felt the weight of his attention in a way that was different from the careful observation she had sensed at the restaurant. This was warmer, more personal. He was seeing her not as a subject to be studied, but as a person to be known. She was wearing one of his old sweatshirts that Lily had insisted she borrow, because her work clothes were too fancy for Saturday breakfast. Her hair was still messy from sleep, and she wasn't wearing makeup, and she should have felt exposed and vulnerable standing there in his kitchen, looking like something less than her professional best. Instead, she felt more like herself than she had in years. "No," Connor said quietly, something softening in his expression. "It's the opposite of a problem." Lily looked up from the plates she was arranging and announced with the subtlety of a freight train, "Daddy's face does a weird thing when he looks at you, Miss Torrey. Like his mouth wants to smile, but he forgot how." Victoria laughed, Connor's ears turned red, but he didn't deny it. One evening after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie about talking penguins, Victoria found Connor on the fire escape outside his living room window. The city stretched out below them, a carpet of lights and shadows that hummed with the endless energy of Manhattan. Connor was sitting on the metal stairs, his back against the railing, staring out at something only he could see. "May I join you?" Victoria asked. He nodded without turning, and she climbed through the window to settle onto the step beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled before Victoria spoke. "Lily showed me a photo album today. Your wife was beautiful." Connor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was, inside and out. "How did you?" Victoria hesitated, not sure if she had the right to ask this question, but needing to know the answer. "How did you keep going?" For a long moment, Connor didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, like the words were being dragged up from somewhere deep. "I didn't. First." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something familiar. The same hollow ache she carried in her own chest, the same weight of loss that sometimes made it hard to breathe. "For 3 months after the funeral, I just existed. Got up, fed. Lily went through the motions of being alive. I was a ghost living in a body. What changed? Lily had a nightmare." Connor's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the living room, where his daughter was sleeping. She woke up screaming for her mommy, and I held her while she cried. And she looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Daddy, are you going to leave too?" Victoria felt tears prickling at her own eyes. "That's when I realized I had to actually live," Connor continued. "Not just go through the motions, actually live. Not for me. I didn't care about me anymore. But for her. She needed a father who was present, not a ghost who just looked like her father. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her." Connor shook his head slightly. "She saved me, really. When I wanted to disappear into the darkness, she was the light that kept pulling me back." They were quiet again for a moment, the city humming beneath them. Victoria heard herself saying, "My ex, he left because I was too intense, too serious. He said he needed someone who knew how to have fun." Connor turned to look at her, his full attention settling on her face like a physical weight. "He was wrong," he said simply. "Being intense isn't a flaw, Victoria. It's depth. It means you feel things deeply, you care about things deeply. The problem wasn't you. The problem was that he was too shallow to appreciate what you were offering him." Victoria laughed, but it came out wet with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "No one's ever called my intensity a good thing before. Then you've been surrounded by the wrong people." The statement was so matter-of-fact, so certain, that Victoria found herself believing it. Found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. Just waiting for someone who could see her clearly. They sat together as the city hummed below them, two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared silence. Have you ever met someone who made you feel seen for the first time in your life? Stay with us. What happens next will show you what it truly means to protect the people you love. 2 weeks after Victoria started becoming a fixture in their lives, a bullet came through Alexander Grant's office window. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Alexander was reaching for the coffee that Victoria had placed on his desk 2 minutes earlier, later than her usual timing, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, except a vague feeling that had made her pause in the hallway and check her phone for messages that weren't there. The bullet missed his head by 3 inches. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a crack of breaking glass, followed by the deeper thud of the projectile embedding itself in the far wall. Alexander dove behind his desk on instinct, and Victoria was already moving toward him, pulling him toward the interior of the building and away from the exposed windows. Security alarms blared throughout the floor. People screamed in the hallway. Somewhere, someone was calling for help on their phone, their voice high and panicked. When the chaos finally settled, and the police had finished their preliminary investigation. They found a message carved into the door of the rooftop access across the street, the building from which the shot had been fired. "This isn't over." Victoria stood in the emergency conference room that had been set up on a lower floor, watching Connor examine photographs of the crime scene with the focused intensity of someone who had seen things like this before. He had arrived within an hour of the shooting, summoned by a phone call from Alexander himself. The billionaire had recognized something in the dishwasher who had saved his life, had seen past the service uniform to the man beneath, and had decided that whatever Connor Hayes was hiding might be exactly what he needed. Professional shooter Connor said, his voice clinical and detached. "Long range, 400 meters minimum. Gone within 90 seconds of taking the shot. Someone with serious training and serious resources." Who would have that kind of capability, Alexander asked. A lot of people. Private military contractors, former Special Forces intelligence operatives who went freelance. Connor set down the photograph he was examining. But the bigger question is how they knew exactly when and where you would be standing. That kind of precision requires inside information. Victoria felt cold despite the warmth of the room. "You're saying there's a mole someone on our staff is working with, whoever did this. I'm saying it's possible." Connor's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her stomach tighten. Concern. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. Someone in this building told that shooter exactly where to aim and exactly when to pull the trigger, until we know who everyone is a suspect. Alexander straightened his expression, hardening into the ruthless determination that had built his empire. "Mr. Hayes, I need your help. Whatever you were before you became a dishwasher, I need that person now. I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" Connor was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. "Access to everything. Security footage, personnel files, financial records, anything that might help me find whoever is behind this. No restrictions, no bureaucratic delays. And when I say run, everyone runs. No questions, no arguments." Alexander nodded slowly. "Done." Victoria watched this exchange with growing unease. She had sensed from the beginning that there was more to Connor Hayes than met the eye. But watching him now, seeing the way he analyzed threats and issued commands with quiet authority, she realized that whatever his past contained, it was far darker and more dangerous than she had imagined, and she was falling for him anyway. That night alone in his apartment after Lily was asleep, Connor reviewed the restaurant security footage for the 100th time. Something had been bothering him since the attack, a detail that didn't quite fit. He had been so focused on neutralizing the threat that he hadn't processed everything he had seen in those crucial 4 seconds. Now, watching the footage in slow motion, he found it. Just before the second attacker went down, he had made a gesture with his right hand. 2 fingers touching his temple, then pointing outward. It was quick, barely visible in the chaos, and anyone who didn't know what to look for would have missed it entirely. But Connor knew. It was a signal, specific to his old unit, a confirmation that a target had been identified and was ready for extraction. They had known he was there from the beginning. The attack on Alexander Grant had been real, but it had also been a message, a way of drawing Connor out of the shadows and confirming his location, which meant this wasn't about Alexander at all. This was personal. Connor closed his laptop and sat in the darkness. Memories he had spent 3 years trying to bury rising up like ghosts. 6 years ago, in a compound outside Kandahar, his team had been hired for an extraction operation. A high-value target, a lot of money, minimal questions about what would happen once the job was done. Standard contract work for men with their particular set of skills. But when they arrived at the target location, Connor had found something that wasn't in the briefing. Women. Children. Families who had nothing to do with the target, but who would be caught in the crossfire if the operation proceeded as planned. Victor Crane, the team leader, had ordered them to proceed anyway. Collateral damage, he had called it. Acceptable losses. Connor had refused. More than refused. He had aborted the mission, gotten the civilians to safety, and blown the extraction window in the process. The target escaped. The $3 million contract was lost, and Victor Crane's career had ended in disgrace when the incident came to light. Connor had walked away from that life entirely, had buried the soldier he had been, and tried to become something different, something Claire could be proud of, something Lily would never have to know about. But Victor Crane had never forgotten, never forgiven, and now he was here, in New York, looking to settle a 6-year-old score. Connor pulled out his phone and called a number he had hoped never to use again, a former contact still connected to the intelligence community who owed him a favor from a long time ago. "I need everything you have on Victor Crane," he said when the line connected. "Current location, recent activities, known associates. Everything." There was a pause on the other end. Crane went dark about 6 months ago, took a private contract in New York, big money, insisted on handling it personally, said he had unfinished business. Connor's grip tightened on the phone. "Does he know about my daughter?" The pause that followed lasted too long. "Name, school, address, everything." "I'm sorry, Connor. I should have warned you sooner, but I didn't know you were the unfinished business until now." Connor ended the call and sat in the darkness, fear coiling in his gut like a living thing. Lily. Victor Crane knew about Lily. 2 days later, Victoria found something in her car that made her blood run cold. It was tucked under her windshield wiper, a manila envelope that hadn't been there when she parked that morning. Inside was a photograph, printed on glossy paper, showing a small girl with honey blonde hair walking toward a brick building with a colorful sign above the door. Lily's school. The photograph had been taken with a telephoto lens, probably from across the street. A red X had been drawn over Lily's face with what looked like a marker, and on the back of the photograph, someone had written a message in neat block letters. "Tell Connor she's next, unless he surrenders. 48 hours." Victoria's hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the photograph. She ran. She ran to the address she had memorized weeks ago, the building in Queens, where Connor and Lily lived their quiet, ordinary life. She took the stairs 2 at a time, because waiting for the elevator was unthinkable. She pounded on the door until it opened, and Connor was standing there, and the look on his face when he saw her expression told her that he already knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Victoria held out the photograph. She watched his face as he looked at it, watched the color drain from his skin, and his hands begin to tremble. For the first time since she had known him, she saw fear on his face. Raw, naked, paralyzing fear. "Lily," he whispered, and the word came out broken. "My little girl." Victoria took his trembling hands in hers, steadying them the way he had steadied her on that staircase so many weeks ago. "We're going to protect her. We're going to figure this out." "Connor, look at me." He looked at her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. The desperate need to act, battling against the paralysis of terror. The soldier fighting to emerge while the father screamed in panic. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why do you care about this? About her? About me? Because for 12 weeks, you looked at me like I was a person." Victoria squeezed his hands, anchoring him to the present moment. Not an assistant. Not a broken engagement. Not just a woman in a red dress. "You looked at me like I was someone worth seeing, even when I thought I was invisible." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the tears gathering in his eyes. "Now it's my turn," she said. "Let me help you protect what matters most." Something cracked in his expression. A wall coming down, a door opening. The isolation he had maintained for 3 years finally breaking apart under the weight of someone who refused to let him carry this burden alone. "When this is over," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm going to ask you something." Victoria smiled through her own tears. "I'm going to say yes." That night, after Lily was safely asleep in her room, Connor and Victoria sat at the kitchen table and talked about Victor Crane. Connor told her everything. The missions, the kills, the moment of choice that had ended his career and made him a target. The years of hiding and hoping that the past would stay buried. Victoria listened without interrupting her expression, steady and accepting, absorbing the darkness of his history without flinching away from it. So this man, she said, when he finished this Victor Crane, he's been planning this for 6 years, waiting for the right moment, waiting until I had something worth taking. Connor's jaw tightened. I thought if I stayed invisible, if I stayed small, he would never find me. I was wrong. What's the plan? Connor looked at her, surprised by the practical question. He had expected horror, judgment, the slow withdrawal of someone who had finally seen the real him and wanted no part of it. Instead, he saw determination, fierce, unwavering determination to stand beside him and fight. First, Lily has to be safe. I'm taking her to Mrs. Kowalski's sister in Trenton. It's far enough away, and Crane doesn't know about the connection. He paused, organizing his thoughts. Then we end this. We use Alexander's resources to set a trap. Crane wants me to come to him, to surrender on his terms. Instead, I'm going to make him come to me on ground that I control. And then I do what I have to do to make sure he can never threaten my daughter again. Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what he was saying. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I want to help. Whatever you need, however I can contribute, I want to be part of this. Victoria, this is going to be dangerous. Crane isn't going to go down easy, and the people he's hired are professionals. I can't guarantee your safety. You saved my life without being asked. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The feeling of being seen, of belonging somewhere. She reached across the table and took his hand. Let me do this, Connor. Let me fight for our family. Our family. The words hit him like a physical blow. When had Victoria become family? When had this woman in the red dress gone from being a subject of quiet observation to being someone he couldn't imagine facing the future without? Okay, he said finally. Okay. But when this is over, when Crane is dealt with and Lily is safe, I'm going to ask you to stay. Permanently. I need you to know that before we go any further. Victoria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her since the night of the attack. I already told you, Connor. The answer is yes. It's always been yes. From the moment you caught me on those stairs. The next morning, Connor loaded Lily into his car for the drive to Trenton. She knew something was wrong. She had known since the photograph appeared, since the hushed conversations, and the worried looks, and the way her father kept checking the windows like he expected something to come through them. But she didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just sat in the passenger seat with her backpack clutched in her lap, and her eyes fixed on the road ahead, quiet in a way that broke Connor's heart. The drive took 2 hours. 2 hours of silence punctuated by occasional questions that Lily asked without looking at him, her voice small but steady. Is the bad man coming? I'm going to make sure he doesn't. Is Miss Tori going to be okay? I'm going to protect her. Are you going to come back? Connor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He couldn't lie to her. He had promised Claire that he would never lie to their daughter, no matter how hard the truth was. I'm going to do everything I can to come back, little bird. When they arrived at Mrs. Kowalski's sister's house, a small, neat home with a garden full of flowers, Lily got out of the car and stood very still for a moment, looking up at her father, with eyes that were too old for 8 years. You have to promise, she said. The real kind of promise, the kind you can't break. Connor knelt down so they were eye to eye. I promise, Lily. I promise I'm going to come back to you. Pinky promise. They linked their little fingers together, and the gesture felt as binding as any oath Connor had ever sworn. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. An origami bird folded from bright blue paper with the careful precision of someone who had practiced many times to get it right. I made this, she said. It's a wren. They're tiny, but they fly really fast and they never give up. If you need to run, it'll help. Connor took the small paper bird, his throat tight with emotion. I'm not running anymore, sweetheart. Lily smiled, and in that smile he saw Claire's light and his own determination blended together into something new. "I know," she said, "because now you have a reason to stay. Miss Tori is like an anchor. She keeps you here." He kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by the wisdom of his 8-year-old daughter. Then he watched her walk into the house, turning back once to wave before the door closed behind her. The origami bird went into his breast pocket right over his heart. The night before the trap was set, Connor walked Victoria through the Westchester estate that Alexander had offered as the battlefield. 40 acres of manicured grounds, a mansion that looked like something from a period film, and enough security infrastructure to monitor every approach. Connor had spent 3 days transforming it into a controlled zone, preparing for every contingency he could imagine. "If anything goes wrong," he told Victoria as they walked through the main house, "you get Alexander to the safe room. The password is Claire." Victoria noticed the name. "Your wife. She's the reason I fight to protect instead of destroy." Connor paused in front of a heavy oak door. "She made me promise to be a father, not a ghost. Everything I do now, I do to keep that promise." Victoria reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You're going to keep it. We're going to get through this. I know." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen there before. Hope. Real hope, not the desperate survival instinct that had been driving him for 3 years. "Because I have something I didn't have before." "What's that?" "A reason to come back." They spent the night going over plans, checking equipment, preparing for every scenario they could imagine. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Victoria fell asleep on his shoulder while reviewing security camera positions, and Connor didn't move, just sat there in the darkness and listened to her breathe. The origami bird in his pocket felt like a promise. The woman asleep beside him felt like a future. For the first time in 3 years, he let himself imagine what that future might look like. Night fell on the Westchester estate like a shroud, heavy and dark and full of waiting. Connor stood in the control room on the 2nd floor of the mansion, watching the security monitors with the focused intensity of someone who had spent decades learning to read darkness. Motion sensors covered every approach to the property. Thermal cameras tracked the heat signatures of nocturnal animals moving through the surrounding forest. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, Victor Crane was coming. 7 heat signatures, Victoria reported from her position at the monitoring station. Moving through the forest in tactical formation. They're approaching from the north. Connor nodded, unsurprised. The false information they had leaked about a board meeting at the estate had been convincing enough to draw Crane out of hiding. Now it was time to end this. "Get Alexander to the safe room," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Password is Claire. Stay there until I give the all clear." Victoria hesitated for just a moment, her eyes meeting his across the dimly lit room. So much passed between them in that look. Fear and hope, and the desperate need to believe that this would end with all of them still alive. "Come back to me," she said softly. Then she was gone, moving toward the study where Alexander waited, and Connor was alone with the approaching darkness. He checked his earpiece one final time, confirmed that communications were working, and stepped out into the night. The estate grounds were silent, except for the soft rustle of wind through trees. Connor moved through the darkness like a ghost, his senses extended to their maximum range. He knew this terrain now had memorized every tree, every shadow, every possible approach and escape route. This was his ground, and he would use every advantage it offered. The first 2 attackers never knew he was there. They were moving through the ornamental garden near the East Wing Professional, but overconfident, not expecting resistance, until they reached the house itself. Connor dropped from a stone wall like a shadow, his movements precise and economical. A strike to the throat, a pressure point at the base of the skull, and both men were down before they could raise an alarm. Not dead, just sleeping. He had promised Claire, no more killing, not unless there was absolutely no other choice. The 3rd attacker was more alert, spinning at the sound of his companion's falling weapon coming up fast. Connor moved faster. A disarming strike, A joint lock, a controlled takedown that ended with the man unconscious on the manicured grass. Then, gunfire erupted from the direction of the main house. Connor ran. The estate became a maze of shadows and muzzle flashes as he worked his way toward the mansion. 2 more attackers had penetrated the perimeter from the south, advancing on the building in a flanking maneuver that would have been effective against a normal security response. But Connor was not normal security. He killed the lights throughout the east wing with a switch he had rigged earlier, plunging the corridor into absolute darkness, against enemies who could see, but not as well as him, who had equipment, but not his training, who had numbers, but not his determination. The outcome was certain. 4 and 5 went down in the east corridor. 6 carried a shotgun that never got a chance to fire before Connor's strike dropped him like a stone. Then there was only 1. Victor Crane stood in the grand foyer beneath the crystal chandelier, smiling like a man who had been waiting for this moment for 6 long years. He was older than Connor remembered, his hair gray now, where it had once been dark, his face lined with the years of planning and hatred that had brought him to this place. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. Connor Hayes Crane said, spreading his arms as if welcoming an old friend. 6 years I've waited for this. You took everything from me that night in Kandahar. My career, my reputation. $3 million that was supposed to set me up for life. You ordered us to kill women and children. Connor's voice was steady, his body still despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I did what any decent human being would have done. Decent. Crane laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty foyer. There's nothing decent about our world, Hayes. There's only the mission and the money and the men who are willing to do what needs to be done. You were one of the best until you got soft. I got human. Same thing. Crane's smile widened. And now you have a daughter. A beautiful little girl with her mother's eyes. I've been watching her, you know, walking to school with her little backpack, playing in the park behind your building. So innocent. So vulnerable. Something cold and terrible rose up in Connor's chest. The part of him that he had buried for 3 years, the part that Claire had asked him to leave behind, stirred and stretched and opened its eyes. You shouldn't have threatened my daughter, Connor said quietly. What are you going to do about it? Crane's hand moved toward his weapon. You've gone soft, Hayes. Spent too many years washing dishes and playing daddy. You've forgotten what you really are. Connor attacked. The fury that drove him was something he hadn't felt in years. Pure and focused and absolutely unstoppable. They crashed through furniture and shattered glass, painting the marble floor with blood and desperation. Crane was trained, experienced, driven by 6 years of hatred that had honed him into a weapon. But Connor had something more powerful. He had a reason to live. The fight went wrong. Crane landed a blow that sent Connor sprawling, followed by a tackle that put the older man on top. A knife appeared in Crane's hand, descending toward Connor's chest with deadly purpose. Connor caught the blade with his forearm, felt it scrape against bone. Felt the hot rush of blood running down toward his elbow. The pain was distant secondary to the face that flashed through his mind. Lily. Her voice echoed in his ears, as clear as if she were standing beside him. The kind of promise you can't break. The origami bird in his breast pocket right over his heart. He was not allowed to lose. With strength born of desperation and love and the fierce determination of a father protecting his child, Connor reversed their positions. His hand found the pressure point at Crane's temple, pressed hard, and the man who had haunted his nightmares for 6 years finally went still, unconscious, not dead. Connor sat there in the wreckage of the foyer chest, heaving blood dripping from his arm onto the marble floor. He had kept his promise. No killing. Not anymore. Victoria, he said into his earpiece, his voice rough and shaking. It's done. Password, Claire. The safe room door opened, and Connor's relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. It wasn't just Victoria and Alexander who emerged from the reinforced chamber. There was someone else with them, a man Connor recognized as the head of Alexander's personal security detail. And that man had a gun pressed to Alexander's temple. Impressive, Hayes. The security chief's voice was calm, almost conversational. 7 men taken down single-handedly. You're as good as Crane said you were. Connor's mind raced, processing this new threat even as his body screamed from exhaustion and blood loss. You're the mole. I'm the cleanup crew. The man smiled without warmth. Crane was supposed to do the hard work, eliminate you, and eliminate Grant. I was just supposed to make sure everything went smoothly. But since Crane failed, I suppose I'll have to finish the job myself. Why, Alexander's voice was tight with fear and betrayal. I trusted you. I trusted you with my life. Your money built this empire on the backs of people like me. People who did the dirty work, while you counted your billions. The gun pressed harder against Alexander's temple. My uncle was one of them. Theodore Ashford. Remember that name? The blood drained from Alexander's face. Theodore? He was your uncle. He raised me after my parents died. Gave me everything. And you destroyed him. The security chief's voice cracked with emotion. You crushed his business, took his clients, and when he came to you begging for mercy, you told him that weakness had no place in your industry. A month later, he was dead. And you never even remembered his name. Victoria was behind them, bound in a chair with rope cutting into her wrists. But her eyes were fixed on Connor, communicating something that took him a moment to understand. She was working on the rope. He had taught her during their quiet evenings together how to work with restraints, how to use fingernails against fiber, how to create slack, how to free yourself when someone thought they had you trapped. Let them go, Connor said, keeping his voice calm, buying time. Your beef is with Grant, not with them. She saw too much. You all did. The security chief shook his head. I'm sorry, Hayes. You were actually trying to protect him. But this ends here. The rope parted. Victoria's foot connected with the back of the security chief's knee, sending him stumbling forward. His gun hand wavered, and in that moment of distraction, Connor moved. 1 step, 1 strike. The security chief crumpled to the floor unconscious before he hit the ground. Victoria stood over him, chest heaving, her wrists red and raw from the rope. She looked at Connor, and the smile that crossed her face was fierce and triumphant and absolutely beautiful. You taught me well, she said. 6 days later, Victor Crane stood trial in a federal courtroom. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit murder, threatening a minor child, assault with intent to kill. The evidence was overwhelming, gathered from security footage and witness testimony, and the confession of the security chief, who had been promised a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Guilty on all counts. The judge pronounced the sentence with the gravity it deserved. 25 years. No possibility of parole. Victor Crane would spend the rest of his useful life behind bars, stripped of the power and freedom he had valued above human life. As the guards approached to take him away, Crane turned for one last look at Connor, who sat in the gallery beside Victoria and Lily. This isn't over, Hayes, he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Connor leaned forward, his eyes meeting Crane's with absolute certainty. Yes, it is. Behind them, Lily whispered to Mrs. Kowalski in a voice that carried further than she intended. The bad man is going away forever. That's what happens when you mess with families. The security chief received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. His last words to Alexander before being led away were bitter, but resigned. Your money can't buy peace of mind, Grant. You'll never escape what you did to my uncle. Alexander stood straight, his face lined with the weight of old guilt finally acknowledged. You're right, but actions can earn it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to prove that. 2 days later, Alexander Grant held a press conference that drew hundreds of reporters. He stood before the cameras without notes, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. I could claim victimhood, he said. I could talk about the trauma of being targeted by men who wanted me dead. But that would be dishonest. He paused, gathering himself. Theodore Ashford was a man I wronged. I didn't push him off a ledge, but I didn't give him any reason to keep climbing. I was so focused on building my empire that I forgot the human cost of my ambition. His voice cracked and he let it crack, let the cameras capture the raw truth of a man facing his own failures. Effective immediately. Grant Industries is establishing the Ashford Foundation. $50 million to support struggling family businesses, to give second chances to the people corporate giants like me have forgotten. Not to buy forgiveness, because I know that's not how forgiveness works. Just because it's right. He looked directly into the cameras, speaking to a ghost he hoped could somehow hear him. Theodore, if you can hear me, I'm sorry. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that apology means something. 1 week after the trial ended, they gathered at the playground behind Connor's apartment building. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of perfect late spring day that made everything feel possible. Connor sat on a bench beside Victoria, watching Lily chase pigeons across the grass with Mrs. Kowalski watching from her folding chair nearby. Alexander had come too looking out of place in his expensive suit, but genuinely happy in a way that Connor had never seen from him before. Lily stopped chasing pigeons and walked over to the bench, her expression serious in the way it got when she had something important to say. I have an announcement, she declared. Everyone fell silent, giving her their full attention. I've been thinking about families, Lily said, clasping her hands in front of her, like a small professor, preparing to deliver a lecture. At school, my friends have regular families. Same blood, same names. Parents who were married before they were born. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But sometimes those families are mean to each other. Sometimes the parents yell and the kids cry, and people leave even though they promised they wouldn't. She shook her head slowly. We're not like that. Connor felt Victoria's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Nobody here shares blood except Daddy and me. Lily continued. But we chose each other. Grandpa Alex chose us instead of his empty house. Miss Tori chose to stay when she could have walked away. Daddy chose to stop hiding and let people love him. She pointed at her own chest, her expression fierce with conviction. And I chose all of you, not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because when I look at us, I see my real family, the kind you build on purpose, not just by accident. Tears were flowing freely now from Victoria and Alexander, and even from Mrs. Kowalski, who was pretending to have something in her eye. Blood families are just luck, Lily said, her voice steady and certain. But us, we're brave. Every single day we choose each other. And that's not luck. She looked around at them, 8 years old and wise as mountains. That's love. Connor pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. How did you get so wise, little bird? Lily smiled up at him. I watched. I watched Miss Tori love you when you tried to push her away. I watched Grandpa Alex choose us over being alone. I watched you stop being invisible. She pulled back her face, fierce with certainty. Family isn't about blood, Daddy. It's about who stays. And we all stayed. That night, after Lily had been put to bed, and Alexander had returned to his penthouse, and Mrs. Kowalski had gone home with promises to bring pierogies tomorrow, Connor and Victoria sat on the fire escape where they had first truly talked. The city spread out below them like a carpet of lights, millions of lives playing out in windows they would never see into. The air was warm and soft with the promise of summer, and Victoria leaned her head against Connor's shoulder with the comfortable ease of someone who had found where she belonged. When Daniel left, she said softly, I promised myself I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I built walls so high I thought no one would ever be able to climb them. Connor's arm tightened around her shoulders. But you didn't try to climb them. Victoria turned to look at him, her eyes bright in the ambient city light. You just stood outside patiently for 12 weeks. You watched me through that restaurant window like I was something worth seeing, and you never demanded anything. Never pushed. I was afraid too, Connor admitted. I thought if I let myself feel something for someone, I would lose them the way I lost Claire, and I wasn't sure I could survive that again. And now, he turned to face her, fully taking both her hands in his own. Now I know that invisible isn't safe. It's just lonely. He paused, searching for the right words. You saw me, Victoria. The darkness and the damage and all the parts I tried to hide. And you stayed anyway. You chose to love me, knowing exactly what I am. What are you? She asked softly. A dishwasher, he said, and smiled. A father. A man who's learning to be human again. He pulled a small box from his pocket. And if you'll let me a husband. Victoria's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple silver band with a single sapphire that caught the city lights like a captured star. This isn't Claire's ring, Connor said. This is your ring. You're not a replacement for what I lost. You're a new chapter, a new beginning. You're the future I didn't think I was allowed to have. Victoria laughed through her tears. Lily helped you write that, didn't she? She's a good consultant. His eyes never left hers. Victoria Sinclair, will you marry me? Yes. The word came out immediately without hesitation. It's always been yes, Connor. From the moment you caught me on those stairs, from the moment I felt your hand on my arm and knew that someone finally saw me. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, soft and sweet, and full of promise, while the city hummed its eternal song below them. 2 weeks later, over dinner at the small kitchen table that had become the heart of their family, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet. She pushed her peas around her plate without eating them, her brow furrowed in the way it got when she was working through something complicated. Connor and Victoria exchanged concerned glances, but gave her space, waiting for her to find the words she needed. Finally, she looked up. Daddy, she said, her voice small and uncertain, in a way it rarely was. If you marry Miss Tori, does that mean Mommy gets replaced? Connor set down his fork, giving his daughter his complete attention. Come here, sweetheart. Lily climbed off her chair and into his lap, her small body warm against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and tried to find the words to explain something that adults struggled to understand. Your mommy will never ever be replaced, he said quietly. She's in here. He touched Lily's chest over her heart. And here. He touched his own. She's in the way you laugh, and the way you care about birds, and the way you always know exactly what to say to make people feel better. She's part of you forever. Then what is Miss Tori? Lily asked. Victoria was watching them, tears gathering in her eyes, staying silent to let Connor answer. Miss Tori knows about Mommy, Connor said. She's not trying to take her place. She's adding to our family. Like when you get a new crayon. The old crayons don't disappear just because you have a new one. You just have more colors to draw with. Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing a constitutional question. So Miss Tori is like a new crayon, something like that. What color? Connor looked at Victoria, then back at his daughter. What do you think? Lily thought for a long moment, her face scrunched with concentration. Then she smiled. Purple, she declared. Because purple is warm, like red, but calm, like blue. And Miss Tori is both. She's warm when she hugs me and calm when she helps me with homework. Purple is the perfect color. Connor hugged her tight, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of his child. Purple it is, little bird. Purple it is. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in a quiet garden venue that Victoria had found in the weeks of planning that followed. Close friends only, which for them meant Mrs. Kowalski and her sister Alexander Grant, a handful of colleagues from Victoria's work, who had become genuine friends, and the small community of neighbors who had watched Connor and Lily navigate their grief over the past 3 years. Lily served as flower girl, taking her duties with the utmost seriousness, scattering petals with the precision of a military operation. She wore a purple dress, the color she had chosen for Victoria, and her honey blonde hair was woven with small white flowers that Mrs. Kowalski had spent an hour arranging. Alexander walked Victoria down the aisle, having offered when she mentioned that she had no family to fill that role. The billionaire who had once seemed so hollow and empty moved with genuine emotion, proud to be part of something real. Victoria wore a simple white dress that made her look like something from a dream. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, woven with the same small flowers as Lily's, and her eyes never left Connor's as she walked toward him. He stood at the altar in a navy suit that Lily had helped him pick out the origami bird she had given him, still tucked in his breast pocket right over his heart. He couldn't stop smiling, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made him look like a different man from the ghost who had been washing dishes just a year ago. The vows were simple and heartfelt. Victoria spoke of being seen, of finding family after a lifetime of searching, of choosing to love someone every single day, even when it would be easier to keep hiding. Connor spoke of learning to be visible again, of honoring Claire by living fully, of the courage it took to let someone love him when he thought he didn't deserve to be loved. As they exchanged rings, Lily whispered to Mrs. Kowalski in a voice that carried clearly to everyone present. "Finally, I've been working on this for months." Everyone laughed and the sound filled the garden like music. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Connor kissed Victoria with all the hope and promise and love that he had been afraid to feel for 3 long years. And when they pulled apart, both of them were crying and smiling at the same time. Alexander rose to give the toast, his glass held high. "I used to think family was what you were born into," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I used to think success was measured in dollars and deals and the size of your empire. I was wrong about both." He looked around at the small gathering, at the unlikely collection of people who had become more important to him than all his billions. Family is what you build. Success is the people who choose to stand beside you, not because they have to, but because they want to. This impossible, wonderful chosen family has taught me more about both than 60 years of living ever did. He raised his glass higher. "To Connor and Victoria. May your home always be filled with laughter, burned pancakes, and the wisdom of 8-year-olds. To family," everyone echoed, and the word had never meant more than it did in that moment. 1 year after the attack that changed everything, they returned to Leonard's restaurant. Not as strangers, not as observer and observed, but as a family. The hostess led them to a table by the window, where afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass and caught the honey blonde hair of a 9-year-old girl who was explaining to Alexander Grant why certain bird species were criminally underrated by mainstream nature documentaries. "It's all marketing." Lily informed him with the authority of someone who had given the matter considerable thought. "Eagles get all the attention because they look dramatic. But wrens are way more interesting. They're tiny, but they sing louder than birds twice their size. That's impressive." Alexander laughed, a real laugh that crinkled his eyes and transformed his face from the hollow king he had once been. "You make an excellent point. Perhaps we should start a campaign to raise awareness about underappreciated birds." "That would be amazing," Lily said, her eyes lighting up. "We could call it the Wren Initiative." Connor watched this exchange from across the table, his hand intertwined with Victoria's. She wore a simple gold band now. The sapphire engagement ring moved to her right hand, where she could see it always. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was smiling in a way that still sometimes took his breath away. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "A year ago, I was invisible." He looked around the restaurant that had been the backdrop to the beginning of their story. "I wanted to be invisible. I thought it was the only way to keep Lily safe, to honor Claire's memory, to avoid becoming the man I used to be." And now, he met her eyes, and in them, he saw the future they were building together. "Now I understand what Claire really meant when she asked me to live. She didn't want me to hide from life. She wanted me to embrace it. Really embrace it with all the risk and pain and joy that comes with letting people in. Victoria squeezed his hand. She sounds like she was an incredible woman. She was. Connor paused, feeling the truth of what he was about to say settle into his bones. She would have loved you. Lily set down her fork with the authority of someone about to deliver important news. I have an announcement, she declared. The table fell silent. Alexander paused with his wine glass halfway to his lips. Mrs. Kowalski, who had insisted on joining them, despite the fancy setting, set down her napkin. Connor and Victoria exchanged curious glances. We're a family, Lily said, looking around at each of them in turn. Daddy, Mommy Tori, Grandpa Alex, Grandma Kowalski, me. She paused for dramatic effect, then pointed at Victoria's stomach. And the baby. Victoria nearly choked on her water. Lily, how did you— My room shares a wall with yours, Lily said matter-of-factly. Sound travels. She picked up her fork again as though she hadn't just dropped a bombshell. Also, you stopped drinking coffee, and you cry at bird documentaries now. Those are classic symptoms. Alexander's face broke into a grin, the kind of genuine joy that would have been impossible for him a year ago. He raised his glass. To the newest member of this impossible, wonderful chosen family, he said. 4 glasses clinked together in the afternoon light. Wine for Alexander. Sparkling cider for Lily. Water for the mother-to-be. And something amber that Mrs. Kowalski had insisted on ordering, despite the fancy surroundings. Outside the window, Manhattan hummed its eternal song. Millions of people rushed past on the sidewalk, caught up in their own lives, their own struggles, their own search for meaning. None of them knew that inside this restaurant, a former ghost had learned to be seen. A woman who had sworn off love had found it in the most unexpected place. A billionaire who had lost everything that mattered had gained a family. And an 8-year-old girl had proven once again that the wisest hearts often come in the smallest packages. Connor looked at the faces around the table. These people who had become his family not through blood, but through choice, through showing up, through staying when it would have been easier to leave. Family isn't blood, he thought. Family is the people who see your darkness and still believe you deserve light. Family is the people who choose you every single day, even when you've forgotten how to choose yourself. He had spent so long being invisible. Now finally he was home. Friends. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our channel family for more heartwarming tales that remind you what really matters in life. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe in second chances, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that family is built on love, not just blood. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to share more stories with you. Thank you for watching, and remember, the people who see you truly see you. They're the ones worth keeping. Until next time.